Hello, today we're going to talk about how to leverage Azure Migrate to assess and migrate the other workloads that you might be running in your on-premises data center up into Azure as IaaS. To get started with Azure Migrate, you're going to go into the Azure Portal and actually create an Azure Migrate solution, new resource. Go ahead and search for Azure Migrate and select that. You'll go ahead and see this option right here and click Create. By default, you'll see this Getting Started dashboard when you sign in. It's going to a couple things in here for discover, assess, and migrate servers. So this is looking at taking your on-premises virtual machines and migrating them into Azure IaaS. Assess and migrate databases, which cover doing your traditional database workloads into SQL paths. And then there's also information for a data box, which is essentially Microsoft sending you a drive. You copy your data over to it, ship it back, and then they can put it into a storage account in Azure, which, depending on the cost of your network links and how much data you have, could actually be a more cost-effective and efficient solution for migrating large amounts of data up into Azure. What we're going to focus on here is migration of servers. So we're going to go ahead and check out the migration goals servers. By default, you won't have anything in here, but except for links to add assessment tools, but I've already got some stuff prepped out for this. What you're going to have for assessment tools are several options. There's Microsoft option, and there's these handful of other ones from the third-party marketplace. If you already have something, for example, like Turbonomics that you've been using on-prem to analyze your workloads, then you can go ahead and use Turbonomics again to analyze our workloads into Azure. What we're going to focus on here is the Microsoft one. To get started with Azure Migrate, first you need to assess what your environment's like. So if you click the Discover button, you're going to get this pop-up. It's going to ask you, do you want, if your machines are virtualized on vSphere or with Hyper-V, then you can go ahead and select the appropriate version. What you need to do is grab the OVA VHD and deploy those to either ESX or Hyper-V. It's a little bit outside the scope of this, but a fairly simple process. Download those, install them. Once you install those or bring those online, they'll automatically start the wizard. That wizard's just got a few things that you need to set up on that VM here. Set up prereqs. Mostly in case of like ESX, there is a SDK that you need to download and install. It gives you a link to that when you need it, so it's fairly easy to grab. You do need a VMware account for that. When you sign into the Azure portal on here, make sure that you're signed into the correct Azure subscription and tenant. Once a assessment VM is tied to a subscription, it cannot be changed. If you want to change it, you'd have to redeploy that OVA. You're then going to authenticate to, in this case, vCenter. vCenter needs credentials to read data that's in the cluster. If you lose a limited scope account, then there will only be a limited scope of what the assessment can pick up. So if you actually want to do a true assessment of everything in the data center, then you need to provide an account that has everything, has read access to everything to actually look and see it. Once you go ahead and set all that up, it'll initiate a discovery. It takes about 10-15 minutes for the engine to actually look at your information, look at your cluster, and then start showing stuff in the portal. So after about that 15-20 minute period, you'll see some information in discovered servers. I'm going to go ahead and check that out. So this will be the servers that whatever that credentials have access to. Real quick, you'll see that there are dependencies here. It requires agent installation. If you want to have a very full in-depth analysis of what your dependencies on your workloads, you can go ahead and install a Microsoft monitoring agent on your VMs. This will actually use an OMS workspace to determine, based upon everything that is going through that box, what other boxes it's talking to. So you can validate that, oh yes, application server 1 is actually talking to application server 2, 3, and then these other databases, and actually get a full dependent map on what those services are talking to, so you can have a very good understanding that when you get ready to migrate something to Azure, that you're migrating the entire solution, or you know what all your dependencies are back to on-prem resources, rather than a best guess kind of scenario. This is not required at all. There's a bit of additional cost for having that OMS workspace and a bit of extra effort installing this agent, but it is a very nice thing to consider, especially if you have very large, complex workloads. At this point, we're just going to go on the quick and easy. So looking at this, it's going to give you the name, IP address, and then specs on the machines that you have enabled. What you need to do then is go ahead and create an assessment. Assessments are how you're going to determine what you have on-prem, and then what that's going to look like in terms of going into Azure. You're going to see this assessment property. You really need to come in here and actually view all these settings. First, your target location. I'm going to go ahead and set this to South Central US, one of the closer data center regions to me. I'm an automatic storage type. I'm going to go ahead and leave this set to automatic. You can change how this goes later if you have the need to, which is a better idea than just telling it you actually need premium disk, maybe than when you actually don't. The next thing up is reserved instances. It is possible to buy virtual machines all at once for a 1 year or 3 year period, and you get a significant discount on that. I think in terms of actually playing out what the assessment's going to do and the cost that's going to be associated with it, you should have a no reserved instances. You'd rather have a worst case scenario on your cost criteria than having maybe a reserved instance on here for a 3 year, getting that discount, and then actually either end up overpaying for a year of services or not using that. Next, with the VM sizing criteria, you got performance based and you have as on premise based. If you do as on premises, it's going to go ahead and actually change some of your settings away for you. You don't have the ability to kind of look at that. This will be as close of it can be in terms of what is on-prem into what is available in Azure. For example, you can't have a 3-core VM in Azure, so if you have one of those on-prem, then you're not going to get one of those in Azure, so it's going to be upsized to whatever the next closest thing is. I highly recommend doing a performance-based configuration. I found a lot of virtual machines on-prem are oversized, and you don't want to be wasting that cost and resources in Azure if you don't need it. So I would also recommend you have options to look at performance history for 1 day, 1 week, and 1 month. The longer you're able to let this sit there and analyze the environment that it's running in, the better idea you're going to get. There'll also be a confidence rating later that'll be impacted by how long you're looking at this. Migrating to Azure isn't something you're generally going to do over one night, so letting this sit there for a month and actually understanding what that workload is like and peaks and valleys on servers is a pretty good idea. I also prefer to set the comfort factor up to 1.2. I like a little bit of fudge room in there. I might not necessarily actually go with that at the end of the day, but I like having that little bit of room in there just to kind of think about. And then also for my VM series, I suggest taking and selecting all of these. If you have an idea that you only want general purpose VMs and you don't want memory optimized, if you don't want compute optimized, go ahead and remove those. But I think having general purpose in there is a pretty good idea, just so you can get an idea of what your workloads might look like and what the assessment instrument thinks those might need to be. Then going down to pricing, the offer box has a ton of things in there: pay-as-you-go, dev test, Azure Pass, subscriptions, lots of options in there about ways you can consume Azure. Pay-as-you-go is pretty good for just a flat base rate. You'll also see a discount. It's possible to have a discount on Azure services based upon commitments with your enterprise agreement. If you have that as a guaranteed thing and you know what that is, feel free to put that in. Once again, though, unless you know it's a guaranteed thing, I would leave this as 0 to ensure that you're getting the possible worst outcome. Final thing to point out is this says already have a Windows Server license. This is on by default. If you do not have a eligible server license that you can get has hybrid benefit, then that's going to be a bit of a sticker shock through you. That's a 45% decrease on or increase in pricing from hybrid benefit. So talk with your account team, your licensing expert, and determine if you do have hybrid licensing. That will save you a bit of money instead of having to pay for the licensing cost with the virtual machine. But you got to be very careful and ensure that you're aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and click save. Now, you can put everything in a group for the first assessment, and I think you should have at least one assessment that has everything in it. That way you just get a good idea. Now, if you just took this entire ESX cluster, this entire Hyper-V cluster, stuck it in Azure IaaS, how much would it cost you? So we're going to go ahead and do that. All right, now let's go look at that assessment that we have. You'll see I got some assessments here already. Pull up this one real quick. Real quick, you have some information here. So how many virtual machines I have that are absolutely ready to migrate to Azure, how many that have some conditions, and then maybe some issues. Also then estimated costs on compute and storage. So you'll see that I have 1 VM that's ready to go, 11 that have some conditions that might need to be fixed. It'd be $1,500 for compute, then $184 a month on storage costs. Gives you a pretty good breakdown on what that's going to look like. I'm actually digging into the readiness of this. Generally, what you're going to see is you're going to see ready with conditions for anything that's running a EFI boot mode. Azure, as of right now, does not have EFI boot mode support, so this would actually need to convert this VM to BIOS boot as part of the conversion process, which can be a thing, so that's actually not that big of a concern to worry about. Now, if we look at the assessment, so everything run down, it'll give you a, hey, this is unknown. In the case of that PF Sense box right there that says unendorsed Linux distro, I mean, it's FreeBSD, so that makes sense. It'll kind of give you an idea how many disks are there, what the storage are, and I give you a good level set of what that's going to look like, and it's also going to tell you what VM it thinks it should be. So, you know, in the case of that DC right there, it thinks a standard A1 V2 will be good enough to support that workload based upon what the assessment's running it as. You actually dig into the properties of a virtual machine. Once again, you'll have that kind of high-level overview. I'll give you a, hey, do you want to? You can do a migration with Azure Migrate. Based upon currently, it's using 2 cores, only using 11% of that. It's got 4 gigs of RAM, only using 19% of that. Gives you an idea of what that utilization workload is in terms of operation usage. Gives you a nice idea. So you can go through, and then you can have multiple assessments. Multiple assessments can be part of any environment. You'll see that I have multiple here. If we look at this one, it says out of sync. That's because I've actually added or removed a group to it as part of the testing, so it'll give you an idea if something's out of date. The cost details thing will just basically break down that overview of what you saw earlier. How much that's going to cost in terms of each VM per compute and per storage unit. It is estimate, but you can always escalate that up and recalculate it as well. If you think that something's wrong, you can always use the public Azure pricing calculator and kind of think about things as well. So once you have assessed your environment, you kind of have an idea of what you're going to move to and how much it's going to cost. It comes to the actual migration phase. So down here we have the migration tools. I already have one enabled. There are also, just like in the assessment tools, other options. There's Carbonite and Cortex. They provide some information here. What's nice about them is they have virtual machine support as well. All right, so looking here, we've got 12 discovered servers, 2 servers that are replicating. We've done a test migration, and then we have a migrated server. So let's look at the replicating phase 1 first. This actually uses Azure Site Recovery in the backend to replicate servers. It's going to ask you, are we virtualized? So yes. I'm going to select the appliance that we put in. If you want to take the information from the assessment you already have, you can do that. We'll just take this group, take that assessment. So we could take this and we go ahead and migrate all of that all in one quick jump. We're just going to do one real quick, just kind of get an idea what this looks like. Take this DC here. All right, so we're going to select our subscription and our resource group. And we're going to select the virtual network and the subnet that we're going to put that on. It'll automatically go on a subnet if you don't have it. It'll once again tell us about Azure Hybrid benefit. The compute's going to give us some information, so automatically based on sizing config. If you disagree with what that information said the sizing config was, you can come in here and manually select basic A1, and it would deploy that. We're going to go ahead and set that back to automatically select. Go next. Like I said earlier, the standard SSD will be good enough for some things, and other things you may buy. If the virtual machine you select doesn't have that tier, if you select a premium one, then you might actually not see all those options. And then you're going to go ahead and then just hit the replicate button. I've already got one replicating, so we're going to go take a look at that. So a couple things are replicated. So you'll see that I have 2 that are in a healthy state, and then 1 that has already been migrated. When you actually hit replicate, something might take a while for it to become in a healthy state. All of these at one point were in unhealthy states. I did no troubleshooting to them. I just let them sit and kind of churn, and after an hour or 2, they went healthy and started migrating. Looking at this app server here, it's in a currently Delta sync phase. What this means is it's done that initial replication and it's done some bit more information there. You'll see here, there's been some failures here. It's all good. As long as it keeps up, we're fine. I have the option to come in here and do a stop replication. I have the option to do a resynchronization, cleanup migration, and do a test migration. This one has already performed a test, which is why it's in a cleanup test migration state. All a test does is it actually takes does a delta sync of that data, turns a create and turns on a VM in Azure. You can actually sign into that VM in Azure and test it out in a limited amount, right? It's going to be on a different networking segment in VLAN in Azure, but you could turn that on, test it out, make sure it kind of works a little bit, and then clean up that test migration when you're done, and then kind of have that good test policy to make sure it even boots and comes online the way you expect it. Once you actually do a migration path, it's going to go ahead and actually turn off the virtual machine on-prem and do a delta sync and ensure that it has every bit of data and nothing's going to change after that completion, and then sync that data into Azure, power VM on, and then you're good to go and change your DNS settings and make sure connection works, and that server then provide whatever features it was. This is something you're going to do during the maintenance window. It may take a couple hours between DNS propagation and Delta syncs and your network bandwidth to actually go from shutdown, full Delta sync and any changes, deployment, and turn on a VM. So it's not something you're going to do in a few minutes during the middle of the day, but something you can plan during maintenance window evening and get that moved in up there pretty quickly. The biggest thing with Azure migration is ensuring that everything is done and planned out from a dependency point of view, that you have your networking segments put in. So it's really good to do that testing and make sure that servers can talk back and forth between on-prem resources if you have them, that the latency is okay, and do that actual network testing. As long as you do your planning assessment and you have an idea what your scale size is, and you test your network connectivity, and ensure your network connectivity is good, the migration part itself is fairly easy. Is a good process to kind of do a lift and shift of those services into Azure. All right, well, I hope you found this useful information into how to migrate into Azure, and I wish you good luck on your migration efforts.